Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of Anxious for Nothing. I'm your host, Cecilia, and last episode, I just want to update you guys real quick because it has been a month. Please forgive me. Much needed break. I didn't expect to take a break at the beginning of a season, but it's all good. This is season 4. And in season 4, we started our first episode and talked about the version of you that you've been waiting for. And that version of you is stronger. That version of you is wiser, more confident, more intentional. The version of you that doesn't need permission to grow. Well, today we're going to talk about one of the first things that version of you has to learn, and that is when the lesson is over. Okay, and that's where my title was inspired by. The lesson. See what I did there? Um, it's also back to school time. I cannot believe this summer is over already. It's crazy. But yeah, class is dismissed. Because some of us will learn a lesson and then turn around and ask God, okay, but can I take the class again? God said, ma'am, sir, no. You already passed. You just keep showing up to class sometimes because you're emotionally attached to the professor. And I know that sounds funny, but think about it. Okay. How many times have we stayed in situations where we've already outgrown because we are hoping something will finally change? Like maybe a relationship, a friendship, a job, a habit, or just maybe a version of ourselves. Sometimes we aren't really confused. We're just uncomfortable with the answer that we already know. And that's what we're talking about today. I recently saw a quote that said, I don't walk away to teach people a lesson. I walk away because I learned mine. And something about that really hit me because real growth isn't about making an announcement. Sometimes growth is simply recognizing I've seen enough, I've learned enough, and I'm ready to move differently. So grab your coffee, take a deep breath, in through your nose, out through your mouth. And let's talk about knowing when the lesson is over. Let's talk about the class we keep retaking. Like, have you ever noticed like how life will give you the same lesson with a different font, a different outfit? I've definitely realized those patterns in the lessons I've learned in my life over the past few years with different people, different situations, and the same outcome. Same lessons, different person, different location, different hairstyle, different red flags, you know? And you're sitting there like, wow, this feels familiar. Baby, that's because it is. Sometimes we think we're starting over when we're actually being given another opportunity to respond differently. And that's a big distinction because life isn't always asking, did you recognize the situation? Sometimes it's asking, did you recognize yourself? Like, guys, do you notice how you react? Did you notice what you tolerated? Did you notice where you abandoned yourself? Did you notice where you were afraid to, like, what you were actually afraid to say? When you knew your truth and you didn't stand on that, did you notice what you already knew but didn't want to admit? That's where the real lesson lies, because sometimes, the lesson isn't lesson is not don't trust people. The lesson is don't trust yourself when something doesn't feel right. Sometimes the lesson isn't never love that deeply again, girl. The lesson is don't abandon yourself while loving somebody else. Sometimes the lesson isn't I need better friends. I need a different family. No, it's I need better boundaries. Do you see the difference? And boundaries isn't, oh, I gotta be mean to everybody and turn everybody away and just be bitchy. No. Boundaries is literally about teaching other people how to treat you. Do you see the difference? That's growth. Okay. So let's talk about when the lesson is over, how you don't need another exam. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're taking a class in college. Okay. You go to every lecture, you take notes, you do homework, you take the tests, and you pass. And I didn't go to actual, like, a college. I went to a trade school where I actually got my certificate to be a dental assistant. But I remember taking the tests that I had to take, all those tests, and I remember doing the homework and I was doing all that stuff and I passed, right? But sometimes and I didn't have to go back to do it. I just went straight into my field, right? Before I even graduated, I already had a position in a dental office that I wanted to work in. But sometimes in life, like, instead of moving on to the next course, you keep going back. You go back to the same classroom, same textbook, same professor, same exam. And eventually the professor is like, why are you here? And the professor to me right now that I'm referring to is God. Okay? The Almighty. Okay? The light, consciousness. Why are you here? And you're like, well, I don't know. I just really connected with the material. No. You passed. Go. And I think we do this emotionally. That's why we have to become masters of our emotion, because we keep revisiting situations we've already learned from. We reread the messages, we replay the conversation, we wonder what we could have said differently. And it all happens like at night when you're trying to go to sleep, We check social media, we ask mutual friends, we create imaginary conversations in the shower. You know the ones where you finally say the perfect thing and everybody in the room like claps. Everybody's like, yeah, Cece, yeah. And then you get out of the shower and realize none of that happened. But you felt pretty good for about 3 minutes. We've all done it. But eventually you have to ask, am I processing this or am I rehearsing it? Okay? Because those are two different things. Processing helps you understand, rehearsing keeps you emotionally attached. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just say, I know what happened. I know what it taught me. And I don't need to keep reopening the file. Walking away isn't always about people. Now, let me make something very clear. This episode isn't just about walking away from people. Sometimes the person you need to walk away from is an old version of yourself. The version that thought being needed meant being loved. The version that said yes when she meant no. The version that thought boundaries were rude. The version that believed struggling meant she was maybe failing in life, especially when you compare it to others. I mean, comparison we know is the thief of all joy. Sometimes we just need everybody to understand you. Sometimes we're constantly waiting for somebody else to validate what you already know. Your next chapter requires you to stop negotiating with your old identity, because you cannot build a life when constantly asking your old self for permission. And it doesn't matter how long you've been living that version of you, because I remember living the same way for a long time until I hit my mid-30s, which I am in my mid-30s, but early 30s. Because you cannot build a new life while constantly asking your old self for permission. And I know that sounds like deep, but think about your phone. When your phone needs an update, it literally start acting a little cray-cray. Apps won't work right. especially if y'all got them iPhones. I got a Galaxy S25, okay? Team Android all day, never owned an iPhone, don't plan to, even though my 16-year-old daughter tells me to get one so we can FaceTime. I'm like, girl, if you don't get a WhatsApp. Anyway, I'm getting off subject. Your phone starts acting crazy when you need to update, apps won't work right, things freeze, your battery drains faster, and eventually your phone is like, girl, update me. From my experience with my daughter having an iPhone, that's what it's pretty much like. But sometimes that's us. We're trying to run a new life on an old operating system, and we're wondering why everything keeps glitching. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're updating. Okay? The difference between quitting and knowing when to move. Now, I want to talk about something complicated because I don't want us to like romanticize walking away. Because there are really, 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 really good people that are meant to be in your life. And sometimes we can push them away because we don't want to actually grow. We don't want to actually move on to the next step in our life. But walking away isn't always the answer. Sometimes we need to communicate. Sometimes we need to repair. Sometimes we need to apologize. Sometimes we need to stay and do the uncomfortable work. Growth isn't, I'm done with everybody. That's not healing. That's avoidance. Wearing a cute outfit, okay? Growth is discernment, okay? It's knowing when to stay, it's knowing when to speak, it's knowing when to apologize, when to forgive, when to try again, and also knowing when you've tried enough. And that's been me. I've tried over and over and over and over and over with the same patterns to try to get a different result, but I always ended up with the same result. And when I realized, okay, I need to have a little bit more discernment here. And that's maturity, because there's a difference between leaving because you're triggered and leaving because you've become clear. And I know a lot of people have left situations like prematurely because they're triggered. But I'm telling you, I've gone from that to literally leaving something because I realized, you know what, you've tried enough. This doesn't like deserve your energy anymore. It's not even about deserving. It's about you're wasting your time. Okay? Once you've become clear, move on. Okay? Because one is a reaction, one is a discernment. One says, I'm leaving because I'm angry. The other says, I'm leaving because I finally understand what this situation is teaching me. That's a completely different energy. Okay? So, what if you're not losing something? Change your perspective. What if you're making room? Sometimes endings feel like punishment, and we think like, what did I do wrong? What happened? Like, why couldn't it work? Why did they leave? You know? Why did they abandon me? But sometimes an ending isn't evident that you failed. Sometimes it's evidence that something has completed its purpose. Your mission has been completed. You can't be attached to anything. Think about a caterpillar. At some point, the environment that kept it safe becomes way too small. That caterpillar, why did that word just feel hard to say? Anyway, that caterpillar doesn't hate the old space. It has simply outgrown it. And I recently watched how the caterpillar gets into place. And I did not know, y'all, did y'all know that before the caterpillar goes into like this cocoon state, it actually has to peel back its own freaking flesh from the face? I watched a video. The face split first, and then it started to come out, and it was doing this like movement, this like contraction in the body until it became this cocoon, and it hardened up into this green solid cocoon. Okay. So this is where it's in for a while. and then it becomes too small because it has outgrown it. And imagine if the caterpillar said, but this is where I've always been. I would never become what it was designed to become. It will never become a butterfly. Sometimes you are not rejected. You're being released, baby. And I know those two things can feel exactly the same at first, but they are not. Hindsight is 2020. Rejection says you're not enough. Release says this is no longer fitting. It's no longer aligned with my life. Those are completely different messages. And sometimes God has to remove what you're desperately trying to hold on to because he knows what your hands need to be available for. So let's reclaim our power. Okay? Because if you remember nothing else from today's episode, I want you to leave knowing that you don't have to keep repeating what you've already learned. So wherever you are, if you can take a breath and say this with me. I am allowed to outgrow what once felt familiar. I do not have to return to prove I've changed. Right? You don't have to go back to those people like, look, guys, I don't drink, I don't smoke anymore, I don't mess around with a bunch of guys, I don't, do all these extra things I used to do. I have a different, personality. I have a different character now. You don't have to do that. You really don't. Okay? You really don't have to do that because who are you trying to prove anything to anyway, besides yourself and God? If you're trying to be a pleaser of people, you're not really focused on pleasing God. And, I don't have to return to prove I've changed. I realize that now. I was burdened by feeling like I need to return to the people that knew the version of me that they relied on, that they liked so much because I was small. I kept myself small. I shrank myself so much. And it wasn't their fault. It was my choice, my decision over and over to shrink. But I have learned that I can forgive without reopening the door. I can love someone, anyone, and still choose myself. I can learn the lesson without carrying the pain forever. And I trust myself enough to recognize when it's time to move differently. One more time. I trust myself enough to recognize when it's time to move differently. That is power. So reclaim your power, guys. And let me just share with you guys 5 things that I've learned. Let's bring this home with 5 things that I think will really help you guys. Number 1, not every ending needs an explanation. Sometimes you already have enough information. You don't need a 47-page report from the universe. You know what you know. Number 2, closure doesn't always come from another person. Sometimes closure is simply accepting what happened without needing it to become something different. Number 3, you can miss someone or something and still know that it isn't for you anymore. Still know that they are not for you anymore. Read that again emotionally. Missing something doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. Sometimes you miss the familiar. Okay, it gets uncomfortable. That doesn't mean you need to return to it. Okay? Don't return to it. Number 4, growth will sometimes make your old life uncomfortable. And that's okay. Hi, Funny Bunny. Thank you for joining. You may start wanting different conversations, different environments, different relationships, different priorities. You may even become like super bored with the things that used to consume you. I know I did. I was a makeup artist for a long time. And in my hometown, I was really successful. I was able to quit my full-time job and I was able to do that full time. The pandemic happened in 2020. I had to close down my shop and I had to move on and I had to get over it and all of that. That stuff used to consume me. I got different environments, different relationships, different priorities now, you know, and at first it felt like, oh my God, I'm so bored because I had so much peace compared to what was going on in my life before. But that's not you becoming boring. That's you becoming selective. Okay. Number 5, you don't have to make your exit dramatic for it to be real. And boy, y'all, did I make so many exits in my life so dramatic. And it wasn't on purpose. I was just really not a master of my emotions. I was never taught how to really get that in check. I was never really given real examples of controlled behavior. It's always been a lot of people in my life that are controlled by substances and their traumas and things that they've been through. And it's not necessarily their fault, but people are going to be people. Okay? You don't need a speech. You don't need a subtweet. You don't need a paragraph with 17 screenshots attached. Okay? Sometimes the most powerful exit is simply changing your behavior. You stop chasing, you stop explaining and returning, and you stop negotiating with what you've already decided, and you keep moving. So, guys, if you remember one thing, if you remember anything from today's episode, remember this. You don't have to keep repeating a lesson just because it's like it once felt familiar. You don't have to keep touching the stove, right, to prove that it's hot. You learned. Trust what you learned. And here's the beautiful part, guys. Learning the lesson doesn't mean you become bitter. It means that you become wiser. Being bitter is a choice. You can move on and still love every single thing that has happened to you because it made you who you are. Every single person that hurt you, you can still love them in the past. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you become wiser. It means you learn how to love without losing yourself. It doesn't mean you stop trusting people. It means you learn to trust yourself too. And that's the reason why sometimes you cannot re-enter into environments and relationships that you were once in because you have learned to trust yourself. You've outgrown that version of yourself. Beautiful people, every single thing is working out for you. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Doesn't matter what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it seems like. Remember that. Okay? You can love without losing yourself. You can choose yourself. Okay? Thank you so much, guys, for spending another episode with me here on Anxious for Nothing. Thank you for everyone who tuned in on my live on YouTube. Season 4, y'all, is about becoming. And becoming isn't always glamorous. Sometimes becoming looks like starting over, which is really rebuilding. Sometimes, it looks like saying no, like walking away. Sometimes it looks like staying. Sometimes it looks like apologizing. Sometimes it looks like forgiving yourself. And that's a big one. And sometimes, y'all, it looks like finally admitting, I already learned this lesson. I want you to take that with you this week. Pay attention to the places in your life where you keep asking for another answer when you've already been given one. Pay attention to the patterns, guys. Pay attention to your body. Pay attention to your intuition. Pay attention to what keeps costing you your peace, your confidence, your time, and your sense of yourself. And ask yourself, what is this trying to teach me? Not, how do I make this person change? How do I prove this person wrong? How do I make this person see me? Not, how do I make this situation perfect, but what is this teaching me about me? Because that's where your power is. And if you're in the middle of a transition right now, I want you to remember, first of all, I'm with you. But you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. You're not the same person who walked into the last season of your life. You've learned, you've grown, you've survived things you didn't think that you could survive, and now you get to move differently. So just keep choosing yourself and just keep trusting the process and keep walking by faith. And please don't be afraid of graduating. Okay? The next chapter needs the version of you who finally learned the lesson. This is Anxious for Nothing. I'm Cecilia, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Until then, in through your nose, out through your mouth, breathe deep. Breathe deep. Trust yourself. And don't go back to a classroom you've already graduated from. Love y'all, and I'll talk to y'all in the next video. Bye.